Hello, welcome to a video that is breaking down the 2025 to 2026 potential Lincoln-Douglas debate resolutions. In this video, we're going to go over the 10 different topic options that might get debated throughout the 5 cycles, and the goal of this video is to help Lincoln-Douglas debate competitors and their coaches make informed decisions about the topic ballots that will come out before each new cycle all season long. So we'll be breaking down every single cycle. So what are we going to talk about in this video? First, we're going to examine the 15 questions that I'm using to look at each pair of topics. Then we're going to break down all 5 cycles, beginning with the September-October topic cycles about criminal justice. Then we'll talk about the November-December cycles, which have 2 topics about the environment. Then January-February, which is about powerful but dangerous tools. Then we'll look at March-April 2025, which is about U.S. foreign relations, before finally examining the Nationals topic options, which are about the duty of government. Finally, I'll share my final thoughts on the topics, what I would recommend voting for all put together, and my thoughts about the topics, positive and negative, in addition to my recommendations to members of the topic writing committee for the future. So before we get into that, who am I and why should you bother listening to me? I competed for 3 years in high school and 2.5 years in college debate. I mostly did policy debate locally in Idaho, and I did world schools at nationals twice, but I also did PF and LD here and there. I assistant coached at Rigby High School for 2 years after graduating in 2018, and I'm now the head coach for speech and debate at Highland High School in Pocatello, Idaho. I'll be starting my 6th year head coaching at Highland in the upcoming season, and my 8th year coaching in general. I'm also the coach of a lot of success in Lincoln-Douglas debate specifically. At our state championship tournament, I coached the 2022 runner-up, the 2023 state champion, and a semifinalist and quarterfinalist in 2024, all in Lincoln-Douglas debate. During my time assistant coaching at Rigby, I helped assistant coach the 3rd place Lincoln-Douglas debate entry in 2022 and the 3rd top speaker in LD in 2020. Additionally, outside of Lincoln-Douglas debate, I've coached the 2022 Big Questions debate national runner-up and the 2025 most recent World Schools debate national runner-ups and quarterfinalist team. So I promise that I know what I'm doing. While I am not the #1 expert in Lincoln-Douglas debate, in terms of my opinion versus random Redditors, I'd hope that you'd trust mine. So what are we actually going to be breaking down in this video? Well, through each of these topics, I wanted to look at them really objectively. And to me, that involves looking at each topic through the same set of criteria to evaluate whether or not it's worth our time debating, and I think that every topic is at least partially worth our time debating, but I wanted us to be able to make decisions off of more than just gut checks, and I wanted us to be able to have a better way of predicting what we think the rest of the community will or won't vote for. So the 15 questions that I'll be looking at are, first, commonality or use of similar topics in the past. Is the resolution going to produce similar or repetitive debates thanks to its similarities to a topic that we have debated either in the same season or within the past 3 years? Additionally, we can look at the length and simplicity of the topic wording. How long is the topic? I've noticed that topics that are longer than 12 words on average usually don't get picked, and if it's ever shorter than 5 words, it's probably too vague or broad and also usually doesn't get picked. There are exceptions to both of these for sure. The third thing we'll look at is topic areas. What general broad subject areas do these topics fall under? And generally it's one of the following 15, and each of those 15 topic areas obviously has a lot of different things within it as well. Then we'll look at the policy versus value, or is it a mixture? What type of topic is this? Is it phrased as an action or a policy topic where a subject ought to or should take an action? Or is it an evaluative or a judgment topic? X is good or bad on Y standard. Or is it a comparative or preference value topic? X is better or worse than Y? Or is it some combination of these factors? Fifth, we'll examine how easy it is to understand at a first glance. Is the topic subject simple enough to understand that coaches and students won't already need to be an expert on the topic, or that they won't need to immediately look something up in order to know what the topic is generally about? Once we look at those things, we'll then examine 10 more issues. Difficulty in research. Is there a lot of recent, relevant, easy to access, and high quality information out there about this topic from the news, from academic institutions, from government think tanks and reports? Seventh, current cultural relevance. Is it something that is being discussed by average and above average intelligence level members of the general public, politicians, pop culture? Is it something that is based in modern happenings? Eighth, appeals to youth interests, or is it novice friendly? Is it something that high school age students and middle school age students will have fun thinking about, talking about, researching about? Will they see relevance to it in their daily lives? And will it avoid making newer students feel uncomfortable? Ninth is political connotations, or is it seen as more liberal, conservative, moderate, radical? Does the topic have a strong connection to partisan politics? Is either side closely aligned to either liberal or conservative political priorities and values? Is the topic more about moderate action or radical action in order to achieve progress? 10th, educational value, or is it something that kids are unlikely to learn about outside of debate, or is it going to challenge deep-rooted assumptions? Does the topic require or incentivize students to learn about issues that they are likely not being taught, misled about, or only given a one-sided understanding of in schools or at home, that by learning about it in debate will make them a more informed member of society? 11th, AF versus neg bias. Does the topic seem to skew towards one side or the other in terms of quantity and quality of argumentation, research, responses, and gut check truth appeal to the general public? 12th, size or scope of ground for both sides. Does the topic cover a relatively simple controversy with only a few viable arguments on each side, or is the topic quite broad with a litany of issues and arguments that could be made for each side of the resolution? I'll also be offering 10 around-ish arguments for the AF and the neg that I've come up with thus far, but don't worry, I won't be going into depth on those. That's for future topic lecture videos. 12th, or at 13th, we'll talk about the friendliness to traditional arguments, lay judges, and philosophical debate on the topic. Does this resolution encourage or discourage, allow, or require debaters to stray from traditional strategies towards overly complicated or hyperbolic impacts, or does it make philosophical framing debate unimportant? 14th, we'll talk about friendliness to progressive debate, LARPing, or on-topic critique debate. So does it encourage or discourage or allow or require debaters on either side of the resolution to make plan and counterplan arguments, disadvantage arguments, critique-based arguments about things like race, class, gender, indigeneity, sexuality, international relations? Are those arguments required or not even viable based on the wording? And lastly, we'll talk about what I think the community's reaction either is already or will be. Will the community be biased, or will it be controversial if this topic is picked or not picked, or when it comes up to a vote? What are the reactions? Does it deal with issues that coaches, students, judges, schools, parents are not a fan of talking about, or are worried about offending or upsetting certain audience members if they have to discuss them? What are people on social media, and what are debate camps reacting to about these topics? So now that we can see how we are evaluating each topic cycle, let's jump right into talking about the very first topic cycle, which will be about September and October. But before we get to that, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please help me out on this channel and continue to make great videos. I know that this is helpful to a lot of people, and it helps me feel like it's worth my time when I see that more and more people are benefiting from them. Also, if you are interested in future content, here are some of the future videos that I'm looking at putting out over the summer. We're going to do a similar video for the public forum debate topics. I'm going to post my second ever speech video about original oratory, and if that video does well and gets a lot of interest, then I'll try and do one for all of the speech events that we do. Then I'll talk about how to approach prepared topics in World Schools Debate and impromptu prep in World Schools Debate. And then after I've done those, I want to make a video about flowing, because I feel like there's a lot of videos about flowing out there, but some of them are more outdated, or they're only really focused on one type of debate, and I would try to go over my process for flowing every type of debate that the NSDA does. Also, if you have other ideas for videos that you would like to see, please comment below, and if they get enough support that I think that it would be an interesting thing for a lot of people, then maybe I'll make a video about it. So please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So now let's talk about the first topic cycle, which is September-October. This is the first of the year. A lot of people begin their debate season or their novice career on this topic, and it is about criminal justice reform. Now, in Idaho, where I coach, we don't typically coach on these topics, but if I get enough interest, maybe I will make a topic lecture video about these as well. There are two options on this topic, both related to criminal justice reform. The first is resolved in the United States criminal justice system. Plea bargaining is just. And I want you to know what plea bargaining is so that this video will make sense. It is a legal arrangement where a defendant in a criminal court case agrees to plead guilty in exchange for concessions or a deal from the prosecutor in either the type or number of charges, or the length or severity of the sentencing or punishment that they're being given. So you agree to plead guilty to a charge or some charges in exchange for some sort of concession from the prosecutor. The other option of what we could debate is, in the United States, the use of artificial intelligence technology in the criminal justice system is immoral. Now, you probably know what those words mean, but you might not know how we're using AI in the criminal justice system. So some examples that I found in my research are predictive policing via data analysis by AI, forensic science analysis, so things like fingerprints, ballistics, fire patterns, report writing, robot police dogs or drones, court and dispatch process automations like the dispatch of the police officers, court report writers, facial recognition technology is probably the biggest one, surveillance technology. All of those are examples of how AI is currently being used or could continue to be used in the criminal justice system. So one of these two topics is what we will end up debating in September and October in the upcoming season. So let's begin by looking at what topics are similar to these. So again, we have in the United States criminal justice system, plea bargaining is just. There are a couple of topics that are pretty similar to this. In January and February 2018, which was my senior year, there was resolved plea bargaining ought to be abolished in the United States criminal justice system, although I think that might have actually been 2017. And then PF January 2011 was in the United States, plea bargaining undermines the criminal justice system. And then November-December 2007 was in the United States, plea bargaining in exchange for testimony is unjust. So we've had three topics about plea bargaining, but you'll notice that in all of them, the affirmative was rejecting plea bargaining. And in this version, the affirmative is supporting plea bargaining. The other option is, in the United States, the use of artificial intelligence technology in the criminal justice system is immoral. So similarity to past topics, we've had some stuff related to AI and obviously lots related to criminal justice system, but never really in a crossover before. So this last season, we debated in March and April, the development of artificial general intelligence is immoral. In the 2022-2023 debate season, the policy topic was about cooperating with NATO, including AI. And then in March and April 2020, predictive policing is unjust, was kind of the beginning of talking about AI in the criminal justice system. So all of these topics have literature that will likely be at least partially relevant to this upcoming topic. But it's more novel than the plea bargaining topic is. So now let's look at a couple more of our issues. So in terms of wording simplicity or the length of the topic, the plea bargaining topic is 11 words long, and it is specified to be about the United States criminal justice system, which is true of both of these, which I find a little weird. I'm not sure why they specified the US, because there's plea bargaining outside of the US, and there's also AI in the criminal justice system outside of the US. This topic is shorter than the alternative about AI, which is about 17 words long, which makes it a longer than average topic. In terms of topic area, these are obviously both about the criminal justice system, but the plea bargaining one is also about human rights and individual freedoms, whereas the AI one is more about technology and innovation in addition to criminal justice. In terms of what type of topic is this, we have a evaluative or judgment topic, because we're judging on is just for the affirmative on plea bargaining. And then on the AI topic, it is also evaluative or judgment based, because it is based on is immoral. That's where the crux of the debate comes down to. So neither of these is a policy topic. Then in terms of is it easy to understand in a first glance? I think that the plea bargaining one is, as long as you know what a plea bargain is. And I think the same is true for the AI topic, except most people know what AI is, and most people know what the criminal justice system is, but many people don't know how AI is being currently used in the criminal justice system. So both of these are relatively simple as long as you have a little bit of base level information. So now let's talk about how easy it is to research these topics. The plea bargaining topic is very easy to research. It's a really recent repeat topic. You could probably reuse a lot of cards because it's not a policy one, so you don't really have to prove uniqueness as much or inherency as much. I think that the AI topic is also decently easy to research, and there's more recent evidence, but maybe less philosophical applicable evidence because of AI's relatively recent rise. Then in terms of cultural relevance, the plea bargaining topic is not very culturally relevant right now. It's not really being discussed in the news, maybe a couple of celebrity trials, but 95 to 98% of all criminal trials end in plea bargains. So it's common, but it's so common that it doesn't make the news. Then we have cultural relevance of the AI topic. AI is really relevant. People are thinking and talking about it all the time, but maybe not applied specifically to the criminal justice system. So then we have youth appeal. I'm not necessarily sure that the plea bargaining topic is very interesting to the average youth, but it's simple enough to understand that I think it's novice friendly. Now, the AI topic, on the other hand, AI might be popular with teenagers and young people. However, if you debated last season, you might be burnt out on debating AI, and teenagers in general might be just tired of talking about and hearing about and thinking about AI all the time. Then, is it partisan based or is it really controversial? I don't think that the plea bargaining topic is controversial. What's weird about this one is that the AF is conservative and the neg is liberal or leftist, which usually it is the opposite. Most Lincoln Douglas debate topics, the AF side is the liberal one, the neg side is the conservative one or the leftist one, and that is not the case on this one. The AI topic, on the other hand, not super partisan, not super left-right based. I would say, generally speaking, anytime that you're talking about injustice in the criminal justice system, that's usually more of an AF-based argument. So I think the neg will be a little bit more conservative or leftist, but not necessarily guaranteed. Then in terms of educational value, I think both of these topics are really valuable for students to learn about and for coaches to learn about. I think that you will learn more about your rights and what is relevant to you if you ever part of the criminal justice system. Let's be honest, it's always possible that whether it's through speeding tickets or drug charges or anything like that, chances are some of our students are going to end up engaged in the criminal justice system. And learning about what a plea bargain is and when you should take them and when you shouldn't take them is extremely educationally valuable for our students. But I also think that AI in the criminal justice system is educationally valuable to learn about as well, because it's an emerging crisis. It's an emerging issue that our students will be kind of the first generation of people to have to deal with. And a lot of debaters end up going on and joining the legal system. And if they want to become lawyers or they want to become judges, learning about this new feature of the criminal justice system is very important. So now let's talk about side skew. Is either of these topics biased? I think that the plea bargaining topic is incredibly negatively biased because you have to defend the status quo, which is very rare in any type of debate as the affirmative side. And I think that it's especially harmful to make the affirmative defend the status quo, because normally the status quo is pretty irredeemable. We have debate topics because we think there's a problem in the world and we think that we should do something about it. But when the affirmative has to defend the status quo being bad, the negative has multiple options. The negative can say so when the affirmative says squo bad and the negative says squo good, the negative has multiple options that the affirmative does not. They can say, actually, it's not that bad. B, even if it is bad, voting for you does something to make it worse. And C, I agree that it is bad. Here's something that we could do instead. But when the affirmative has to defend the status quo, when the affirmative has to say everything is fine, their case is basically just defense. There's nothing persuasive about saying everything is great. And the affirmative cannot read a new counterplan in the 1AR about how to make plea bargaining slightly better because they have to say it's already fine. The affirmative can't say, yeah, but if we vote for you, everything will get worse, because the negative doesn't have to read a counterplan. And if the negative does read a counterplan about why plea bargaining isn't just so we can do this thing, you didn't base your case off of that counterplan. So when the affirmative is forced to say everything is fine, the negative now is so much easier because they can say everything is not fine. Here's what we should do about it instead. And it's very hard as the AF, especially in a 4-minute speech, to respond to that. So I think it is very negatively biased on the plea bargaining topic. And typically, we want our topics to be equal or affirmative biased because being AF is so hard in terms of flow judge or even trad judges just because of how short the speech times are for you. Now, the AI topic in criminal justice, on the other hand, I think is pretty balanced. I think that it's easier for both sides. I think that the articles that are talking specifically about morality of AI in the criminal justice system are usually talking about the AF, whereas arguments about efficiency are usually about the neg. But I still think it's easier for the neg to say efficiency is moral than it is for the AF on the other topic to say everything is fine and we don't need to change anything. So in terms of how big the topic is, there are lots of arguments on the plea bargaining topic, but not so many that it's going to be hard to prepare. The affirmative will have to do more prep than the negative does because the affirmative will have to be prepared for every single objection or way that we could fix plea bargaining that the negative could come up with. Whereas on the AI topic, there are lots of arguments on both sides, but they generally break down to being about the same stuff with different links. And I think that, again, because the topic is slightly biased in favor of the affirmative, that's not necessarily a bad thing because being affirmative is just harder in LD in most rounds. Generally speaking, AI is also rapidly developing, which means that by the time we get to this topic, the likelihood is there will be even more articles, even more arguments that we haven't heard of before. So I think that the ground is only going to get better on the AI topic, whereas I don't see the ground changing on the plea bargaining topic from now until September and October. So, how friendly are these topics to the average traditional or philosophical or lay debater? I think that framework based arguments are really good on the plea bargaining topic. There's lots of criminal justice philosophy. You can value justice or you can value governmental legitimacy. I think that in terms of framing, it's going to be pretty important on the plea bargaining topic. Justice probably is the only viable value just because of the criminal justice system being the goal being justice. Whereas on the AI topic, it's also still going to be about justice, but there's less philosophy necessarily written about AI specifically in the criminal justice system, but there are more value options because the criminal justice system implies the government, so governmental legitimacy. You can also read morality because the topic is immoral, or you could use justice because the justice system. So there's more value options, but I think that it will be harder to find good, relevant philosophical arguments that don't require more like logical leaps on this topic. What about your progressive debate styles? I think that LARPing or policy debating essentially in Lincoln Douglas debate and reading plans will be pretty difficult on the plea bargaining topic because how do you read a plan that defends the status quo? Or unless you just specify one specific part of plea bargaining that you say is just, but I don't think that that does enough to prove the resolution true as a general principle. But the negative can still read counterplans about all of the ways that it's unjust and here's what we should do instead. So I also think that the affirmative is really going to struggle reading critique style arguments that affirm the topic. Like if you want to critique the topic, that's fine, but if you want to read critical arguments that are defending the topic, it will be very difficult to do so as the AF, but the negative has a lot of great options for reading critiques. Whereas on the AI and criminal justice topic, I think it's easier because even though it's not a policy topic, the AF can get away with saying it is immoral, so this is what we should do instead, and that feels like more fair and doesn't really make being neg harder to prep because any argument about why we should change would be rooted in why it's immoral. The neg, I think, will have a harder time on counterplans because if you read a counterplan that says we should change AI in criminal justice, you're basically admitting that the current way it's being done is immoral. But I think that there's lots of critical arguments that you could read on both the affirmative side and the negative side of this topic. Then lastly, what is the community reaction to this? So far, what I've seen is people are worried about offensive arguments being made on the plea bargaining topic or really anything about criminal justice because it's the first topic cycle and things about like racial bias and gender bias and plea bargaining. People are also really not happy about the fact that the affirmative has to defend the status quo. That's pretty rare for any type of debate, or just say that everything's fine is pretty rough, I think, for the pro side. Whereas on the other side, I think that a lot of people aren't happy about another AI topic after 2 AI topics last year at the same time in March and April, and a policy debate topic the year before that about AI. But other than that, I don't see much backlash other than it's not a policy topic, and there's lots of coaches mad that these aren't policy topics. So here are some ideas for arguments that could be made on both sides of the plea bargaining topic. We have improving efficiency to avoid delaying justice, saving resources for trials that need them the most, helping gain testimony or information used against other accused criminals, reducing the likelihood of appeals, reducing media misinformation, avoiding forcing victims to testify in court or watch their perpetrators get off scot-free, reducing the time spent in pretrial detention, getting around overly harshly written laws. Judges and prosecutors are doing plea bargains differently and making them better. Plea bargains deter crime. It increases the acceptance of responsibility for wrongdoing. It makes the court system more transparent, and it promotes compromise. So those are affirmative argument ideas. Negative argument ideas, I think, are better and more diverse, but we have criminals these are reasons why plea bargaining is not just. Criminals are getting lower sentences than they deserve. Innocent people are coerced into pleading guilty. It discourages your use of your constitutional right to a trial. The entire court system isn't just, or the abolish criminal justice system critique. It encourages over-policing and over-prosecuting. Trial by bench instead of trial by jury would be a better system. Defendants are overworked and underfunded, so they don't have enough resources to make sure that plea bargains are just in terms of public defenders. Letting defendants do an interlocutory appeal when they lose pretrial motions would be the only way for them to be just. There should be more requirements in the exchange of discovery, such as enforcing discovery deadlines. Fewer people going to jury duty because of plea bargains means that there's less interaction with the criminal justice system in a way that makes them trust it. Plea bargains result in really bad policing and evidence collection because none of it ever goes to trial, so nobody's that careful about the process because it's not going to be held up in court. There's less judicial oversight because judges just turn it over to lawyers on both sides, and it reduces the condemnation or shame that happens of criminals in a trial because it's all happening behind closed doors. So I think there's arguments on both sides, but the arguments are better on the negative side pretty undeniably. On the AI criminal justice system topic, on the other hand, we've got gender and racial bias for the affirmative, that AI is biased in those ways, especially with facial recognition technology, increasing surveillance or violating privacy rights, false trust in evidence created with AI, but it's harder to explain or validate. We have discouraging protest or the exercise of civil liberties. We have more predictive policing or over-policing. We have lacking human oversight or runaway and out-of-control AI being a problem. The algorithms being used are trained on bad data. There's focus more on resources of predicting bad behavior instead of using resources to intervene to prevent bad behavior or crime. It's bad for the environment, and there are also inaccuracies or hallucinations of AI, which is bad. On the negative side, why might it be moral or just is efficiency. When the courts are more efficient, people get their right to a fair, speedy justice trial faster. Justice delayed is justice denied. You also have accuracy or reducing human error in like video and photo analysis and like eyewitness statements. It's easier to find victims of trafficking and kidnapping. Predictive policing is good to properly allocate resources and can reduce overall spending on criminal justice. Forensic analysis is way more accurate when we use AI. Lawyers will know things better because they can read case law and previous examples and study up much faster and efficiently. There's arguments about how there's less elder abuse with AI, that police officers are safer with the use of AI, that risk assessment is a good way of like knowing whether or not someone's going to reoffend or not going to show up to trial with AI, and also it provides language translation services in courts in criminal justice. So good arguments on both sides, although I do find myself more persuaded by the affirmative slightly than the negative. So what do I think is going to win out of these two topics? I think that plea bargain is going to unfortunately win. I think a lot of coaches are going to vote for it because it's shorter and simpler. It's not about AI, which makes it more unique. And people who remember the previous plea bargaining topics will be like, oh, those were fantastic. We should continue. But I'm hoping that the student vote for AI in a much bigger way than the coaches vote for plea bargains, because the plea bargaining topic is hella neg biased. The AI and criminal justice topic is way more interesting and flexible, and I think most camps will hopefully pick this one. But I'm still going to give plea bargains about a 60% odds of being picked. I really hope that this video can swing it in the other side's favor, because what I hope will get picked is the AI and criminal justice topic. Because if the plea bargains topic was just phrased as is unjust, I would vote for it, because the negative would still have tools. But in this world, the affirmative is just screwed. Like, it is not persuasive to say everything is fine for 6 minutes. And if your burden is to prove is just, then you can give reasons why it's not bad for 6 minutes. But if they bring up something that has nothing to do with your case as a new reason why it's unjust, you could win your case and the topic would still be false. So I would give the plea bargaining topic a 5 out of 10. Because of the way that it's written, and I would give the AI topic a 7.5 out of 10. So for me, AI is clearly the better topic. If I were you, I would definitely vote for the AI one. Now let's talk about the November-December 2025 topics, which are all about the environment. First up, we have the United States ought to prioritize green growth over degrowth. So we need to know what those two terms that we're comparing mean. Green growth is working through capitalism to increase economic activity without hurting the environment or while helping the environment and climate change. Whereas degrowth is purposefully shrinking the economy, minimizing our consumption, slowing or reversing the growth of the economy to help the environment, the climate, and to conserve our resources. So the topic is about which of those two strategies do we want to endorse. And it's interesting that it says prioritize, because you could not do both at the same time even if you wanted to. So it's not really prioritize, it's choose. Then we have option B, which is the United States ought to rewild substantial tracts of land. Now, what does it mean to rewild? Because I think that most people probably have not heard of this. But it looks like protecting ecosystems and biodiversity by returning land that has been developed or influenced by human activity back to a pre-human state, focused on cores, corridors, and carnivores is like the three words that most rewilding literature focuses on. Examples of what it could look like to rewild would be disallowing fishing, hunting, or harvesting, removing barriers like dams, fences, and roads, benign neglect, as in neglecting parts of the environment to just let it do its thing, like let hiking trails get grown over, for example. Planting depleted native plant species, so things that used to not exist there, planting it on purpose so that it grows back. But biggest of all would be reintroducing highly interactive species like beavers and wolves that have been previously chased out of environmental areas. A substantial tract of land is just a large piece of land that is designated as a distinct unit, which is still vague, but it's definitionally it's vague. It is defined as not a super clear term. So let's talk about past topics that remind us of these. So first up, the United States ought to prioritize green growth over degrowth. So we've had decently similar topics to this. In 2023, we debated in November, December, the same topic cycle, that the People's Republic of China ought to prioritize environmental protection over economic growth, which was a environment and growth topic. In PF in January of 2019, we debated the United States federal government should prioritize reducing the federal debt over promoting economic growth. So it's still similar because is economic growth worth it or not to pursue? And then the college policy topic in 2016 and 2017 was about climate change. So we've had a decent amount of topics that are sort of similar, but we've never really had an explicitly green growth or degrowth debate topic before. So what about the other side? The United States ought to rewild substantial tracts of land. We have in November, December of 2023, the United States ought to prohibit the extraction of fossil fuels from federal public lands and waters. We have the college policy debate topic in 2022 to 2023 was resolved the United States should vest legal rights and or duties in one or more of the following. Artificial intelligence, nature, non-human animal species. And then in January, February of 2004, we have resolved a government's obligation to protect the environment ought to take precedence over its obligation to promote economic development. Now, I also want to say that degrowth, while it may never have been a specific topic before, has been an issue that is discussed on multiple different debate topics as like a disadvantage or as like the capitalism critique. So it's not going to be the first time that anyone's ever heard of these in like circuit debate, but it will be one of the first times that people have really heard about these things in a context outside of circuit debate. So what about simplicity of wording of the topic? So the topic is pretty simple for green growth versus degrowth because it's only 10 words long, but a lot of people might not know what either of those things are. Then on wording simplicity or length, people of the rewilding topic, it's also 10 words long, but people might not know what rewilding or tracts of land mean. I think that both of them are decently easy to figure out if you just use inferences. So both topics probably require the same amount of research if you want to be an informed voter just to know what it's about. They're both about the environment, obviously, but the green growth topic is about economics and business, whereas the rewilding topic is about human rights, individual freedoms, movements, things like that. So both of these topics are sort of policy topics, but the first one is also comparative. It is X versus Y. And then the rewilding topic is using ought to instead of should. So it's kind of like a policy topic, but it's pretty vague. So we're not really sure what it means or how much you have to specify when you rewild. So I'd say the second option is closer to a genuine policy topic than the first one is, even though they both use ought to. Then in terms of first glance check, like I said earlier, both of these you're going to have to do a little bit of research on, chances are, to know what they're about. Most people haven't heard of degrowth, and they won't really get when they first look at this topic that this is basically a debate about two things. How do we solve climate change, growing the economy to avoid hurting climate change or to create the technology that will reverse climate change, or is growing the economy the problem in the first place? It's also a debate of capitalism with a green smiley face or socialism or communism. Whereas the other topic seems very policy debatory, but it's a lot more like local level, moral, animal, nature rights activist, philosophy, values based, even though it's the policy topic compared to the other one. So what about researching? I would say that there is definitely research on both of these topics. The problem is on the green growth or degrowth topic, most of the literature in favor of degrowth is very theoretical. It's very hypothetical. It's not really rooted in reality of like trying things. And a lot of the stuff that is rooted in reality is problematic. The neg is like, it was so good for the environment when COVID happened and shut down the economy. or Trump's tariffs are so bad for the economy that it will be good for the environment. Like, the little real world examples that they are existing for degrowth are pretty hard to defend. The AF research about green growth is pretty good because all of these environmental activists and even oil companies want people to believe that we can grow the economy and make the environment better at the same time. So there's pretty good AF research. The neg research is a lot less, and it's rough, and it's not as taken seriously as like a policy position. Whereas on rewilding, there's not as many news articles about rewilding that are both recent and US based, but there is a decent amount of like academic research that you can look into on both of these topics. Then we also have, in terms of cultural relevance, it's not a super relevant topic for green growth or degrowth, but climate change and natural disaster is relevant. And then on the rewilding thing, there are lots of places right now in Idaho and out around the country that have public land up for sale. And climate change is also relevant. So I'd say that rewilding is probably a little bit more relevant to the average person. In terms of youth appeal, degrowth is like kind of an insane thing to be arguing about, like topically. And so I think that'll be cool and interesting and wacky to some kids. But I also think that kids that are like super into the outdoors, super into science, animal lovers, all of those types of kids will really love the rewilding topic. So it might be more novice friendly. In terms of partisanness or controversy, the first topic is basically liberal versus progressive. There's no real room to be conservative on either side of the topic. I guess green growth is closer to being conservative, but both of them are more like progressive ideals. And degrowth is literally like a socialist argument. And so it's pretty controversial once people realize that. Also, unfortunately, climate change is kind of controversial. So you're not really going to get around the ability to debate climate change on that first topic. In terms of the rewilding land topic, on the other hand, it's not super partisan. Like, there's not like a huge, like, digging in your heels Republicans versus Democrats thing on this, but I would say the AF is generally more liberal, the neg is generally more conservative. In terms of educational value, they are both really good things for kids to learn about. I think that it's very valuable to teach kids about the green growth versus degrowth argument, because letting them see the ways that individual consumption patterns are not really to blame for climate change, but it's what companies are doing and the broader economic planning is doing. And also, where in schools are kids going to learn that degrowth might be a good thing or that socialism might be a good thing? Probably nowhere. So the education will be a lot more unique, I think, on the green growth versus degrowth topic. But I also think that they're really unlikely to learn about rewilding as a legitimate political solution to anything in most classes unless they major in environmental sciences in college. I also think that because it's an issue that's going to come up on a lot of local ballots and be a huge issue in local and state elections, that having kids learn more about rewilding and whether or not their candidates support the selling or rewilding of public land would be a pretty good thing for them to learn about to become more effective members of our democracy. So now let's talk about side skew, or bias of one side or the other on these topics. So beginning with green growth versus degrowth, I definitely think that this is AF biased. The literature is better for the AF. The appeal to the average lay judge is better for the AF. The negative is way more theoretical and hypothetically, like truth-wise, maybe makes more sense. Like, there's not a lot of evidence to support that we can there's not a lot of historical evidence to support that as the economy gets better, the environment gets better. So I think that part is good for neg, but other than that, it's pretty objectively AF biased. Whereas on the rewilding topic, I actually think it's pretty balanced. There are a lot of economic arguments and economic interests that will come out for the negative, but the examples of when we've tried rewilding historically are very AF biased. So I think that there's good arguments and good things for both sides. How big is these topics? I actually think green growth versus degrowth seems huge, but it all just boils down to climate change solvency and capitalism, good or bad. Those are the two things that the debate is about. There will be a lot of different warrants for both of those things, but those are the two arguments that topic will be every single round. And then for the other side of the topic, I think rewilding is decently limited. There's not a huge variety of arguments on either side, so it might be an even more novice-friendly or season opener-friendly topic because the research burdens won't be as big. There's not as many arguments for either side to make. How about friendliness to traditional or philosophically inclined or lay debaters? You don't have to read a plan on the AF, but you could. Anything that does green growth is trying to grow the economy, which would be prioritizing it over degrowth. So any political action that would be growing the economy and helping the climate is topical, which could result in a lot of pressure for trad debaters on the neg to have to block out specific plans. They don't have to read one themselves, but they'll have to be prepared on the neg. But I also think being prepared on the neg in front of a lay judge or as a traditional debater is pretty difficult. Trying to convince them, hey, not like their like slightly liberal policy is worse than socialism is going to be a pretty hard sell for a lot of people. You can value morality or governmental legitimacy on that topic. Then if you look at the other one, rewilding, you don't necessarily need a plan on rewilding. I actually think you need one less, or that there's less room to be super specific because there's not as much evidence out there that's super specific, but there is good framework arguments and good examples, and there's good philosophically based ground for both sides. You can value morality or governmental legitimacy once again. What about our progressive debaters? I think that it's pretty unclear what the status quo necessarily is on the green growth topic, because there's arguments to be said that A, we're not prioritizing degrowth at all right now, so there's inherency. B, we're also not prioritizing green growth right now. They don't really care, the current administration or Congress, about trying to help the environment as we grow the economy. But also C, there's a world where you could say, actually, we are prioritizing degrowth right now just accidentally because the Trump administration, the economy just shrunk because of their priorities on tariffs. So there's a way that you could actually say that the status quo right now is prioritizing degrowth, that the status quo is prioritizing green growth, or that the status quo is prioritizing neither, which means that the AF has like a lot of rooms for plan based debate, but I think negative counterplans will also be super easy. I think the negative gets access to like capitalism critique arguments, but critique arguments for the affirmative side, I think will be pretty tough. So on the rewilding topic, on the other hand, there's good plan and advantage counterplan flexibility for both sides. I think that there are some big shtick impacts that you could read on both. It's probably bigger impacts on the green growth or degrowth arguments, but there's also good critical ground for topical critique debate on both the AF and the neg on the rewilding topic. In terms of community bias or reactions to this topic, what are people saying or what are people thinking? I think that degrowth is going to be a pretty tough sell to trad debaters once they actually research it, and a lot of even prog debaters are unhappy at how vague the topic was written, and it doesn't really feel very policy based because it's comparing X versus Y, so it might get trad votes of people who don't look into what degrowth actually is, or like liberal but traditional debaters might want green growth versus degrowth. Then we have the United States ought to rewild substantial tracts of land. I think people are pretty unhappy at how vague the policy terms are. Even the people who want more policy topics don't really like this policy topic, and trad debaters who don't want plans feel like this is just a policy debate topic. It even uses the word substantial. But it's also very unique, so you can't recycle old camp files, so some people might like that, and some people might not like that. And what the world of the AF is guaranteed to look like, or the world of the neg is guaranteed to look like, also is not super clear because of how many different things rewilding can mean. So what are some arguments that we could make on the green growth side versus the degrowth side? Well, the AF could say in favor of green growth that it raises wages and decreases poverty, that it creates jobs, that it prevents costly damage to the environment, that it's more likely that other countries will follow our lead if we do green growth, that we will create innovation or new technologies that will undo the effects of climate change. And then I think most AF cases will be like one contention about green growth good and one contention about degrowth bad. So some degrowth bad arguments would be that degrowth would reduce economic quality of life and economic equality. There's arguments about how it's unsustainable and would result in rebound effects, that we would degrow for a little while and then bounce right back to growing again. That degrowth is totally not feasible and just not going to happen. That degrowth would result in military action against the United States, that we would be weak so people would want to attack us, or that degrowth would lead to civil unrest and rioting. The negative, on the other hand, could say in favor of degrowth and against green growth, that degrowth would avoid hitting ecological limits and depleting finite resources, that it would prioritize genuine social well-being over GDP growth that only really benefits the rich, that it's the only way to avoid making the global south pay for the environmental mistakes of the global north, that it helps beyond climate change, but also with biodiversity loss, pollution, energy scarcity, that it would help do away with capitalism, which is bad for pretty much everyone who's not part of the owner class, that it would help small businesses and local communities, that green growth doesn't work because of decoupling the economy from the environment is like impossible, that green growth creates moral hazard, as in we believe that we can pollute more because we're doing green growth, and it will balance out. Green growth leads to inactivity whenever environmental protection isn't economical, where if it's ever not going to grow the economy to help the environment, we'll choose not to take that action because we're focused on growth more than we're focused on green. And then we also have green growth isn't green, and creates things like renewable energy that are still bad for the environment. So now that we've looked into both of these topics and we've seen what they might be debating about, let's also look at the rewilding topic first. So the AF could talk about restoring and protecting biodiversity, mitigating climate change with carbon sequestration, reducing soil erosion and flooding risks, increasing ecotourism, which is good for local economies, restoring stewardship of land to indigenous tribes, improving water quality, reducing the risk of wildfires, and embracing the ethical responsibility to protect nature. The negative could talk about human and wildlife contact is unsafe, about how if we bring wolves back or if we bring bears back, that could be bad for human safety in the environment. We have that it would be bad for agriculture to bring back some predators, that maybe we would have to push out the locals that live in the areas that we want to rewild, that it's very expensive. There's also a leakage argument that if we rewild our areas and get rid of the human activity there, then that human activity will just move elsewhere or to other countries so the environment harms are still happening, they're just happening somewhere else. There's an invasive species argument that will reintroduce invasive species, or that if we rewild, invasive species will take over, that it violates people's property rights, which are really important, or anti-human, rewilding rhetoric is neo-colonialist or is anti-indigenous. So there's probably more arguments, but just in my research, this is what I was able to come up with and what I was able to find. So what do I think is going to win? I think that green growth is going to win over rewilding, even though I don't think it should. I think that a lot of traditional debaters and coaches will vote for it because it's comparative and it doesn't need a plan. And I think a lot of progressive debaters and coaches will vote for it because any policy that boosts green growth is topical, because anything that grows the economy is not prioritizing degrowth. Also, the negative gets to read the degrowth disadvantage or the capitalism critique literally every round, which a lot of people already do as sort of a generic impact turn strategy. So I think that a lot of prog people will like this topic. But if it loses, I think it will be because people do research before voting, and your traditional part of the community will realize, oh, trying to defend degrowth in front of a lay judge as the negative sounds bad. But I'm still giving it 55% odds of winning over rewilding. But I hope that rewilding land will win for three main reasons. One, I think it's really relevant to stuff going on in the news, particularly in not just Idaho local news, but in a lot of different places local news. And I think that it appeals to our rural schools and states in a way that a lot of topics don't. I also think being forced to defend degrowth again on the negative is too hard, but being forced to defend or negate protecting the environment in general is an easier sell on rewilding. I also think that rewilding is a simpler topic and easier to teach to novices, and more friendly to your average novice political levels of knowledge coming into November, December. So in terms of what I would rate these topics, I think green growth versus degrowth is a 7.5 out of 10. And the other topic, rewilding land, is an 8.5 out of 10. So now let's move on to topic cycle number 3. January, February is the weirdest group because I think that the two options have the least in common with each other. One of them is about nuclear weapons. One of them is about geoengineering, which is once again about the environment. So they're both kind of about the environment. They're both kind of about something that could be a weapon. So it's powerful but dangerous tools is the only way that I could connect them. So the first option is resolved. The possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. So who currently possesses nuclear weapons? Russia, the United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, and North Korea. Those are the countries that we pretty much know of for sure having nuclear weapons. Or we can debate option B, which is resolved. On balance, geoengineering is moral. What is geoengineering? Because most of us probably don't know. It is the scientific and technological interventions that try to mitigate the effects of climate change rather than eliminating the causes or reversing climate change. Two forms of this are solar radiation blocking and carbon removal. So let's get into the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral first. What topics are similar to this one? So college policy actually recently debated all about restricting nuclear forces, not quite possession being immoral, but there's lots of evidence on both sides that would be applicable to this topic. This is also very similar to a topic in January, February of 2020, which was states ought to eliminate their nuclear arsenals. And this exact topic was debated in 2001 and I believe 1991. Again, the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral. What about geoengineering? We've really never had a topic about geoengineering. Maybe it's come up on certain topics as it's like a typical impact defense argument route about how like climate change can be easily solved by this or like an advantage counterplan, but it's never been an explicitly topical position. The previous topic cycle, the one that we were just talking about, was either green growth or degrowth or rewilding land, which are about the environment and climate change, and geoengineering could actually come up on either of those topics on green growth or degrowth. So I think that it is a little repetitive of that, and I'm not a huge fan of having two cycles of potentially environment topics in a row. And PF October 2012 debated something kind of similar, which was developed countries have a moral obligation to mitigate the effects of climate change. And remember, geoengineering does not undo climate change or reduce our emissions or make us contribute to climate change any less. It says if we're going to keep contributing to climate change, we have to do something to mitigate the effects of it. So this is kind of similar, but geoengineering is pretty recent in terms of it being a potentially viable strategy. So what about the simplicity or wording of the topics? So the possession of nuclear weapons is immoral is pretty simple, and it's only about 7 words long. It doesn't really require any outside research. The only weird thing that people might, have annoying debates about is the definition of possession. I could see people trying to say this isn't a debate about using nuclear weapons. It's only a debate about possessing them. But I think that that's dumb and would hopefully be easily, resolved. Whereas the other topic is only 5 words long. It's very short, but it is very weird because it has on balance and is moral. The last time we had on balance in an LD topic was 20 years ago, and we've only ever used it on one topic that was just reused once in the 90s and once in the 2000s. So it's simple and short, but also not simple at all. Then we have what topic areas are these? Well, the nukes one is about military and security, but also about international relations and institutions, whereas the other one is about the environment and science and technology. So the type of topic the first one is evaluative or making a judgment because you're saying it is immoral, and the geoengineering topic is also evaluative or judgment because it is moral, but it is comparative as well because it's on balance. But again, it's weird because it's the second time we've had a topic where the AF is saying something is fine rather than saying something is bad, which is what we usually come to expect. I can't really say that the AF has to defend the status quo, even though it's written in the present tense, because geoengineering is so theoretical, underdeveloped, not really being used anywhere. So if you say the AF has to defend the status quo because is moral, there isn't really a status quo to defend. So the AF could say nothing bad has happened yet, I guess, so it's moral. I think that the possession of nuclear weapons topic is super simple and clear. The geoengineering one is not super simple and clear on a first glance. Most people don't know what geoengineering is, and they'll be confused by on balance and is moral. And how do you reconcile those two things in the same topic? So how easy are they to research? The nuclear weapons one, super easy to research. There's tons of past topics on nukes to prove that. The recent college policy topic helps. The fact that nuclear war is a big fear again because of the stuff going on with Iran and Israel and India and Pakistan and China and Taiwan. There's lots of evidence. It's hard to research the geoengineering topic because it's very new. There's not a grounded literature base for it. It's very hypothetical. The few studies that have been done that the AF would use aren't great. But even just in the last couple of days, there's been a couple of articles coming out about it. So there's more recent news articles, but the quality of academic and government materials is not very good on the geoengineering side. So cultural relevance. Unfortunately, the nuclear weapons topic is very relevant right now because of Iran and Israel, Russia, the Trump administration, and unfortunately, geoengineering is becoming more relevant because there's a lot of conspiracy theories about it. There are like 22 states that are considering banning geoengineering, and climate change makes it relevant too, of course. Then we have youth appeal. I think that some kids will think the nuclear weapons topic is like scary but also interesting, but a lot of traditional debaters and coaches will hate it. Whereas I don't think geoengineering is like a super interesting thing unless you're a science kid or if you're like a climate change activist. So what about partisanness or controversy? So the nuclear weapons topic is becoming more partisan and controversial because of the Iran-Israel situation, but I also think that calling the US immoral is like a tough sell for some lay judges and trad debaters. Whereas on the other end, I think that the geoengineering topic is controversial at the state level because there are some states that are banning it based on conspiracy theories, and some people don't even believe in climate change. So it is unfortunately controversial for that reason. What about educational value? I think that both of these are good to learn about. I think that the nuclear weapons one is going to help kids more because it's more relevant to them being an informed voter in terms of their foreign policy beliefs in upcoming elections, and it will help them unlearn some propaganda about why only the US should have nuclear weapons, for example. But I think the other one is useful, but it's less useful because we just learned about climate change and the environment from the previous topic. And I think this needs a couple more years of research and study and academic thinking about geoengineering before the research base is good enough that kids will learn as much just from the research process. So I think nuclear weapons is the more educational topic. What about side bias? I think nukes is pretty balanced, but there's a slight AF skew because you don't have to defend getting rid of them anymore, unlike the previous version of this topic. And most of the arguments in favor of the neg are not about morality. So if you're judging is immoral, I think that the lit base is better for the AF. So it's mostly balanced, but it's slightly AF biased. Whereas the geoengineering topic, despite what I saw some people on Reddit trying to say, is extremely negatively biased. There is not good affirmative literature about geoengineering, and there's lots of articles that are literally saying geoengineering is immoral. So I think that the moral side is better for the negative, and I think the logic side is better for the negative. You also can basically only do consequentialist framing because even though it says is moral, it's on balance. And the only moral systems that are evaluated on balance are usually the consequentialist ones, which I think favor negative debaters. And also the AF basically has to defend the status quo. I think if you say because it's moral, we must do it, that doesn't make sense. If it was we are morally obligated to geoengineer, then the AF could read a plan. But I don't think that's the case on this one. So in terms of size and scope, there's lots of great arguments on both sides of nukes. I think there's more variety of arguments on the affirmative side, but there's only 9 countries that own nuclear weapons, so there's not too many different countries that you have to like prep specific things for. Versus the geoengineering topic, there's not a lot of literature about morality for the AF. There's a lot of calls for banning it, which I guess gives the AF some inherency of sorts, or the neg some inherency. The AF really only has climate change arguments. Those are any argument the AF would make would just be tying back to it solves climate change. So the only variety is the impacts, which is not great because that makes it really easy for the neg to prep you out. But there's also no specified actor. We don't know who's doing the geoengineering and like whether who or what is doing the geoengineering makes it moral or immoral. And there's also 2 very different kinds of geoengineering that we talked about earlier. So I think it's a very big topic in some ways, but it's not very big in others. So what about friendliness to traditional debate or lay debate or philosophy debating? I think that the nukes topic is pretty friendly. You don't have to read a plan. There's lots of framework and philosophy on both sides. There might be nuclear war arguments. There probably will be nuclear war arguments, which maybe aren't trad debater or lay judge friendly, or even experienced judge friendly if they have certain biases, but you can value morality or governmental legitimacy. When it comes to the other topic, I would say that it's not very friendly to lay debaters or to trad debaters because the on balance part of the topic moots non-consequentialist frameworks. There's really only big shtick climate change impacts on the AF, and it's hard for lay judges on this topic, I think. And in front of a lay judge, you really need to be on the better side of the topic in terms of the literature because you can't use theory or plans or tricks or things like that to get around being on the bad side of the topic like a negative could with enough time to explain them, or if you were in front of a prog judge. What about prog debate? I think that the possession of nuclear weapons topic is friendlier than a lot of prog debaters think it is because you are condemning the status quo. And when I was in high school, we didn't have policy topics in LD, but people were still reading plans. People were still reading counter plans. Because if the AF is saying the SQO is bad, then it's pretty logical to assume that they'd have a way to make it better, and that the neg would be prepared to say, I disagree, right? I think that there are minor repairs or exceptions that could be made to nuclear weapons that are not necessarily saying possession is immoral, but the way that we possess them is immoral, right? Or the neg could say AF has to prove that it is generally true, and the neg could be like, here's why it's not generally true. And there's good critique literature on both sides of that topic. Whereas the geoengineering topic, the AF has to defend the status quo. It's really hard to make critical arguments topical, and it's really difficult to layer or frame arguments philosophically. So I don't think that it's very prog friendly on the geoengineering topic. In terms of what are people saying about these, I think a lot of traditional debaters and coaches are angry about a nuclear war topic. And I think that there are also prog debaters who are upset that this is not a policy topic like it was when it was debated in 2020. Whereas on the geoengineering topic, I think people are noticing it's really weirdly worded. I also think people will be upset when they look at this that it's a second environment topic in a row after the previous cycle of environment topics. And I think that there are going to be people who are pretty upset that the AF is forced to like defend the status quo of a status quo that isn't real because geoengineering isn't really real yet. So what are some argument ideas of what we could discuss on either side of the nuclear weapons topic? The AF could talk about human extinction being inherently immoral and how we need to avoid it. Environmental harms of producing nuclear weapons and therefore possessing them requires that the environment was harmed. Military spending. There's coercion or imperialism arguments that strong countries use nukes to coerce other people, that nuclear weapons are inherently immoral because they can't be discriminately used. They violate the rules of war. They would harm civilians as much as they would harm military targets. The concept of using them to deter is in and of itself immoral. That miscalculation or accidents can happen. That every country that possesses nuclear weapons is immoral because they're violating promises or agreements to reduce the size of their arsenals or to disarm their nukes. They create massive fear and panic and anxiety in civilians all over the world, which is immoral, or that they are dishonest or that they lack transparency. All of those, I think, are arguments that people could make. The negative, on the other hand, could talk about how it deters large-scale war, how it protects citizens in your nations, which might be the number one moral requirement of a government, how it discourages using or possessing weapons that are like humanitarian nightmares, but more likely to be used if it were not for nukes, like chemical and biological weapons, that it justifies massive interventions to stop countries from attaining them, that it requires less overall military spending, because if you own one nuke, that's more effective than like 100,000 troops. It improves international relations and alliances when you have nuclear weapons that you can agree to protect people with, that developing nuclear weapons leads to discoveries in sciences and energy and technology that benefit the rest of the world, that protecting your national sovereignty or the autonomy of nations is inherently moral and nukes help you do that, that military systems have been modernized to maintain readiness and innovation because of nuclear weapons, which is good, and that nuclear weapons even deter non-military threats like economic coercion, diplomatic betrayal, cyber attacks. So there's decent arguments on both sides. On geoengineering, the affirmative could say that geoengineering is moral because it buys time for a real solution to climate change, that it is a last resort tool, that if we can't stop climate change, we can at least prevent the worst harms of it from harming those who didn't even cause it. There's intergenerational justice arguments that we have to protect future generations from climate change, that it's the most cost-effective way to avoid dying from climate change. It's less expensive than reducing emissions, that it's more politically popular, so it's more likely to be successful, that we could protect global food security from climate change, that we could protect ocean ecosystems from climate change, we could maybe increase investment or boost the economy in geoengineering, which is good outside of climate change. You could force the companies that are causing climate change to pay for the geoengineering research and technology, because if you're not going to be able to get them to shut down because we live in a capitalist world, then at the very least you could make them pay for the response in geoengineering. And then it might foster innovation along the way of doing geoengineering that help us reverse climate change or not contribute to climate change in the first place. The negative arguments, I think, are much better. The moral hazard argument, or geoengineering will give us a free pass to harm the environment as much as we want, because we can just say, oh, but we'll launch blankets onto glaciers, and we'll put mirrors in outer space, and we'll put plankton in the ocean, and things like that. Also, a lot of geoengineering could unintentionally disrupt the climate, like go too far and cool it down enough that it causes problems. There's negative effects on biodiversity and ecosystems, potentially. It's very irreversible, a lot of the solutions of geoengineering, and we're playing God, which might be immoral. It lacks effective governance and control, because if one country does geoengineering to solve climate change, they're making a decision that affects the rest of the world. And maybe not even governments are doing it, but private companies are doing it, which doesn't sound very moral to make a decision for the whole world. Termination shock would also be a thing, where if we ever stopped geoengineering, the immediate shock of the climate and the planet of responding to that could be really bad. You're also limiting the choices and the freedoms of future generations, because once you start geoengineering, you basically force them to keep doing it. The research itself of geoengineering, the process of learning about it, has been pretty immoral and messed up. Forcing the global south to disproportionately bear the cost of climate change is probably what would happen under a geoengineering world. And it could also be weaponized for climate warfare. Like, oh, if you do this thing to us, we will alter the climate in your country to make farming impossible, which would be pretty immoral. So what do I think is going to win out of these two topics? Unfortunately, I think that geoengineering is going to win if people don't listen to me and the other people that are ringing alarm bells about this topic. I think people are going to vote for it because it seems cooler and more novel or unique than nuclear weapons. People don't want to debate nuclear war, and that people can use some of the same impact solvency level prep from the previous topic on this one. But I think if people do their research, they will learn before they vote that the wording of the geoengineering topic is terrible, that it's very one note for the AF, and even the one note of climate change is bad in terms of literature, and it's a very extremely neg-biased topic. But I'm still going to give geoengineering slight odds, because I think that people who don't watch this video, people who don't think about it and just vote automatically, will vote for that topic. And I hope that I'm wrong. So what do I hope wins? I hope nuclear weapons wins, because the 2020 version of this topic, the states ought to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, produced some of the best LD debates that I've ever seen, and I think this is close enough. I think that this topic is friendlier to both lay debaters and progressive debaters than geoengineering is. I think that it's more unique than the other slate of topics that kids will debate this season. Like, you're not forced to debate national security over and over again, although it's possible we debate 3 national security topics in a row, but we will be forced to debate environment twice in a row if we pick geoengineering. I also think geoengineering could be a good debate topic, but it needs a few more years of research before it has a viable enough literature base, especially for the January-February topic. We should not be putting the national qualifiers topic from many places, the TOC topic from many places, on something that is so untested and unpredictable. So I'm going to give the nuclear weapons topic a 9 out of 10, and I'm going to give the geoengineering topic a 5.5 out of 10. So now let's talk about the March-April topic about U.S. foreign relations. This is the state topic where I'm from, and we don't really debate a lot in April, but our state championships is in March. So this is also a very important topic cycle. Option A, we have the use of economic sanctions by the United States is immoral. So it's another topic that the mechanism is immoral, which we've had a lot of those this season. And what are economic sanctions? Withdrawals of trade and financial relationships for the purpose of compelling, punishing, or preventing certain actions. This could look like freezing or seizing assets of another country in your state. It could look like restricting exports or imports to or from a certain country. It could look like travel bans, and it could look like arms embargoes. All of those are examples of economic sanctions. The U.S. uses economic sanctions all over the place against a lot of different countries. Some of the biggest ones that we can think of would be Venezuela, Cuba. There have been some on Russia by the United States. The travel bans, if those are economic sanctions that Trump had just put in place, there's a lot of. But we've been thinking more about tariffs than economic sanctions lately, which they are two different things. The other option of what we could debate on this topic is that the United States military ought to abide by the principle of non-intervention, which would be the prohibition or of the threat or the use of force against another country to meddle in their internal or their international affairs. So non-intervention doesn't only apply to the military in the literature, but the topic is only focused on the U.S. military should not intervene. So I don't think that means that the U.S. doesn't intervene if we're attacked. I think it means intervene in a conflict or a situation of another country, right? So the U.S. should not go into another country to try and stop a certain movement, to oppose a certain political faction, or get involved in a war that is not between the U.S. and another country. So, what topics are similar to these ones that we've debated in the past? Well, the economic sanctions, the use of economic sanctions by the U.S. is immoral. In PF in 2020, they debated the U.S. should end its economic sanctions against Venezuela. In PF in 2017, they debated it again, but about Cuba. In 2016, they debated sanctions again, but about Russia. And in February of 2010, the LD topic was about economic sanctions. Should they not be used for foreign policy objectives? So some similar topics, but it's been quite a while since LD debated about economic sanctions. Then for the non-intervention topic, it's pretty novel. We haven't really had a military conduct topic in quite a long time. The college policy debate topic says that we should have fewer alliance commitments, which would probably involve intervening less. So some recent-ish relevant evidence. And then in 2017 in public forum, we debated, in order to better respond to international conflicts, the United States should significantly increase its military spending. So that topic was basically saying we should respond more and fund our military more to do so. So both of these topics are decently unique, at least within the last 5 years of high school debate, and especially within Lincoln-Douglas debate. So what about simplicity? Both topics are about the average length of 10 to 12 words. The sanctions topic is 11 words. It's pretty simple. It's specific to the United States, but it's not specific to which countries we're sanctioning or what type of economic sanctions we're using. Whereas the non-intervention topic is 12 words long, also pretty simple, specified to the US military, but not specified to specific conflicts or specific regions or specific countries that we should not intervene. So it's specific on the actor, but not specific to the recipient of either motion. The topic areas of the first one are about economics and trade, but also international relations and institutions. And the topic area for the non-intervention one is military and security, but also international relations and institutions. So what types of topics are these? The first one, the sanctions one, is once again evaluative or judgment-based because it is immoral, but it could be debated as a general principle, or you could talk about specific sanctions that we are using that are immoral. Whereas the other topic is policy, but it's not really a plan-based one. The plan is going to kind of be the same either way. You could technically say, here is a specific conflict that we should not intervene in, but affirming probably requires abiding by the entire principle. So you could just base your case around a specific example, but I don't see very much room for plans where you only advocate for abiding by the principle in one situation or in one conflict. But it's more of a policy topic that is also a general principle topic. So yeah, it's not like a policy debate substantially increase. What about first glance? I would say that nukes or that economic sanctions is pretty easy to understand, except a lot of kids don't know what a sanction is until you teach them. And then the other one I would say is the non-intervention topic is pretty easy to understand. You can just infer what non-intervention means. So I'd say that that one maybe is more easy to understand by like a 15-year-old at a first glance. Granted, this topic is being debated at the end of a season. Very few novices are going to have their first tournament be on the March-April topic, so it's less important that the topic is immediately easy to understand, except for maybe lay judges. So what about how easy they are to research? I would say that it's pretty easy to research the sanctions topic in a moral context, but most recent articles are being put out about tariffs, not sanctions. So there's decent timeless evidence, or within the last couple of years evidence, but in terms of like this year, this month evidence, I don't know how good the sanctions evidence will be. Maybe the travel ban stuff will be pretty recent. But the non-intervention topic, there's not very many recent articles that use the phrase non-intervention. Like the phrasing of this topic, there's not a lot of like super recent news articles that are going to be using the same words. But obviously, given the situation with Iran and Israel, there's going to be a lot of arguments about whether or not we should get involved in that conflict. So what about cultural relevance? I would say that sanctions are not flashier in the news as much as tariffs are, whereas unfortunately the non-intervention topic is very relevant because of Iran, Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, things like that. Whereas, let's look at youth appeal or novice appeal. I think that most teenagers are not going to be like super pumped to talk about economic sanctions. The non-intervention topic will probably be more interesting, but also maybe scary, which would push people away from wanting to debate it. But any kid that is considering joining the military might find it pretty interesting. What about partisanness or controversy? I think both political parties in the US have used economic sanctions in quote unquote good and bad ways. But usually saying that something the US is doing is immoral is in a foreign policy context, more of a liberal side things, and the neg on sanctions is more conservative. Maybe forcing people to say that the U.S. is immoral in some lay circuits would be pretty tough. Whereas the other topic, I don't think that it's super partisan, but Trump campaigned on saying no more foreign wars and has now totally flipped the script and is saying, yay, like foreign intervention. Like we can't, it is a threat to our security to allow these other countries to do these things, or we have to go defend our allies. So I think that the AF is getting more liberal and the neg is getting more conservative as current events roll on. And who knows in 9 months from now if that will be more true, less true. What about educational value? I think both of these are good for kids to learn about. I think that you're not very likely to learn about why economic sanctions are bad, especially why the US would be immoral for using them in high school or in your house. But I do also think that kids already kind of learn about the merits of getting involved or not getting involved in a historical context of foreign conflicts in their history classes. But this would be a good way to reinforce that learning by showing it's relevant now. It's not just why did we or did we not get involved in World War I or World War II at a certain time. This would make it clear now. So what about skew or bias towards one side or the other? I think that sanctions is pretty balanced, but there's a slight AF bias because most neg literature isn't about sanctions being moral. Whereas I think that it's also pretty balanced on the non-intervention topic, but maybe there's a slight affirmative skew because most academic sources and trustworthy news sources are arguing against intervention more often than they're arguing for intervention. What about how big the topics are? I think there's a decent quantity of arguments on both sides of the sanctions topic. There's probably a bit more or maybe a bigger variety of arguments on the AF side of sanctions. There are great arguments on both sides of the non-intervention topic, but a lot of them are pretty similar. I think that it's going to be a link versus link turn debate more often than like a this contention A versus contention B. On the sanctions topic, I think on the non-intervention topic, it's going to be contention A versus contention A. Which side solves it better, intervention or non-intervention? What about traditional debate friendliness? I think that because the sanctions topic is evaluative and not a policy topic, it's more trad friendly. You don't have to pick an alternative or endorse getting rid of economic sanctions. Americans also don't know as much about economic sanctions, so they're less likely to have a strong bias about it. There's lots of philosophy arguments. You can value morality or governmental legitimacy. Whereas I think that the military non-intervention topic has a higher potential for war impacts, which might not be the most traditional or lay friendly. There's pretty huge hyperbolic impacts, which are harder to avoid talking about on this topic. There are great philosophical arguments on both sides. The affirmative is not required to read a plan, but the negative could read counter plans or alternatives to non-intervention. So I don't think it's anti-traditional debate, but maybe it's not as friendly as the sanctions topic is. But in terms of progressive debaters, I don't think that the sanctions topic is the friendliest, but there are options because you're criticizing the status quo. You could read plans via examples of specific sanctions that you will prove are immoral that we are currently using. There's pretty good on-topic critique literature for both the AF and the neg could also read picks. Like if the AF is criticizing all sanctions, then the neg could pick out of specific sanctions and say, actually, these ones are moral. So that is kind of friendly to prog debaters. Whereas on the military topic, I think that it is more prog friendly because the AF can read specific plans or AFs about where to get out of or where to avoid intervening in an upcoming crisis. There are good affirmative critique justifications. I don't think the critique justifications are as good on the negative. It's going to depend on like what the AF says, right? Or why they say we should abide by that principle. What about the bias of the community or how are we reacting to this topic? I think some coaches are angry that the sanctions topic isn't written in a policy style, but I haven't really seen very much negative publicity about this topic from kids or coaches. I think that the non-intervention topic, progressive debaters and coaches will probably want a topic that is a policy-esque topic after so many evaluative topics. The biggest thing that I see people being not happy about on the military topic, though, is that it's following potentially the nuclear weapons topic. So either we're going to have two environment topics in a row because geoengineering gets picked, or if we vote for nuclear weapons and then we also vote for non-intervention, then that's two military topics in a row getting picked, which might upset some people. So I think this topic is going to depend on the previous topic cycle. So what could the affirmative talk about on the sanctions topic? You could talk about how sanctions are bad or immoral because they worsen economic outcomes for innocent civilians, that they don't achieve change and they actually force governments to dig in their heels for those exact reasons we're sanctioning them for. They make it more likely there is retaliation against the United States, that they violate the sovereignty of other countries by trying to influence them, that they create humanitarian crises, that they are collective punishment, which is immoral, that they fuel black markets and corruption, that they are hypocritical and they create double standards because we sanction some countries and not others, or we sanction other countries for things that we do ourselves. That they are not equitable, or that we use sanctions against non-Western or countries in the global South most often, and that they violate international law and human rights. The negative, on the other hand, can say that economic sanctions usage is moral because they avoid military interventions, that they strike at the motivations of leaders, that they help improve human rights or democracy conditions, that they help U.S. businesses, that they protect U.S. national security, that they deter similar bad actions by other nations and make them not want to do the same thing to avoid sanctions, that they prevent us giving money to harmful activities in other countries, that they encourage behavior change rather than regime change, which creates instability and conflict, that they follow through on our moral responsibility to act in the face of injustice, and that they encourage international unity or follow on to get other people to sanction the same way that we are, which boosts alliances and creates accountability. What about the military non-intervention topic? What can the affirmative say about why we should embrace that principle? These are all phrased as reasons why intervention is bad, but you could also rephrase them to be why non-intervention is good. Interventions create more terrorism and anti-US backlash. They prolong instability rather than de-escalating or ending conflicts. They violate the sovereignty of other nations. Interventions are expensive and trade off with spending on domestic priorities. Interventions are unpopular among Americans and lead to civil unrest. They cause civilian casualties. They spread out our military or cause military overreach. That interventions make other countries dependent on the US, that they harm our global reputation and our alliances, and that non-intervention promotes more diplomatic solutions. Whereas the negative could say that we should not embrace the non-intervention principle because interventions fight for democracy and human rights, that we are morally obligated to respond to injustice, that interventions protect our allies, they secure our economic interests like trade routes, that they deter or contain conflicts and keep the threat of those conflicts to the United States mainland small, that interventions help fight terrorism, they protect U.S. citizens living in other countries, they help respond to humanitarian crises, they demonstrate our global leadership, or that interventions prevent power vacuums and instability or regime changes. So, what do I think is going to win? This topic is really hard for me to predict. I think both topics are good, but in 9 months from now, who knows what the current world is going to look like. I think if nuclear weapons loses in January and February, then it's more likely that the military intervention topic wins. But I think that if nukes wins in January, February, that sanctions will win because I don't think people are going to want two military security topics in a row. I think especially after getting two economic inequality or democratic socialism topics in a row in the 2024-2025 season, people want variety, and the topic committee didn't necessarily give us that. I'm giving it 50-50 odds, maybe 51-49, with a slight edge to non-intervention. I think that what I hope will win, both topics are good, so I won't be upset, but I think that I want it to be sanctions because I want it to be nuclear weapons and not geoengineering, and I don't want two military topics in a row. So I would rather we get the combination of nuclear weapons and then sanctions than the combination of geoengineering and sanctions, or the combination of nukes and non-intervention. Sanctions, I think, is also less likely to experience rapidly changing literature or some horrible global event of World War III that makes one side of the topic basically unwinnable in front of certain judges, which could happen in the next 9 months on the military intervention topic. But I would give both of these topics, as of right now, a 9 out of 10. I think they're both pretty solid. We've come to the last topic cycle in this video, which is the nationals topic, or the June topic, and I think that these topics are about the duty of government. The first option is a topic that I basically debated as my very first LD topic all the way back in 2017. And the topic is: resolved, wealthy countries have a moral obligation to provide development assistance to other countries. What is a wealthy country? This is probably the most industrialized, high GDP or high GDP per capita countries, and the most capital rich countries, such as the US, Canada, European countries, certain ones, Australia, and Japan. Development assistance is the transfer of money and resources from richer countries to poorer countries that are meant to fight poverty and build economic growth and opportunity in the recipient country. Or we could debate the second option, which is democracies ought to prioritize the protection of civil liberties over national security. So this is a comparative topic and a policy topic. The civil liberties imply individual rights protected by law, such as freedoms to speech, religion, and assembly. Whereas national security is the protection of safety and collective defense of a sovereign state from threats including military, economic, social, and environmental factors. So both of these topics are actually pretty similar to things that we've debated in my time in speech and debate. Both of these kind of borrow from 2017. In November, December of 2017, we basically debated this exact topic, but instead of countries, we used the word nations. I also found a topic lecture, not one from me, I was still in high school, that was specific to this topic. So you can click on the link there and watch it if you want to learn more about what it was like to debate that topic. But in November and December of 2011, we debated an individual ethics version of this topic, which is individuals have a moral obligation to assist people in need. Whereas the democracies ought to prioritize the protection of civil liberties over national security topic, we also debated when I was in high school, but it was differently worded. In 2017 at Nationals, the debate was a just government ought to prioritize civil liberties over national security. So the current topic is different because it changed it from a just government to democracies, and it changed it from prioritize civil liberties to prioritize the protection of civil liberties. So maybe more specific, I guess. In Nationals in 2014, we debated a smaller version of this topic where the sides were flipped, where it was the U.S., specific country, should prioritize national security objectives over digital privacy of citizens. So it was a smaller, specific version of this topic. But also, all the way back in 2001, there was an LD topic about when the United States is engaged in military conflict, the demands of national security ought to supersede conflicting claims of individual rights. So we've debated national security versus civil liberties specifically multiple times, but there are tons of topics. Anytime that there's a military topic, anytime that there's a privacy topic, this topic is basically what we're debating. So both of these things have been debated in the past. What about their wording or their simplicity? So the wealthy countries topic sounds like a mouthful, but it's only 13 words long. So it's pretty average. Whereas the other topic is 12 words long, also average length, but it feels more straightforward. What topic areas are these covering? Well, the wealthy countries have a moral obligation topic is about economics and trade, just like the sanctions topic from the one before, but it's also about international relations and institutions, just like the topic before, and government and democracy. Whereas the civil liberties versus national security topic is about government and democracy, but it's also about military and security, just like the nuclear weapons topic from before this, and just like the non-intervention topic from before this, but it's also about human rights and individual freedoms. So what type of topics are these? The first one is evaluative or judgment because it's have an obligation. We are determining, do we have an obligation or not? So it's kind of a fact topic, but also a value topic. But the affirmative could specify what the obligation is to prove the topic. So you could treat it like a policy topic, even though it's not a policy topic. Then for the civil liberties versus national security topic, it's a quasi sort of policy topic, but it's also comparative or preference based. The affirmative could specify examples of when, where, how we would protect civil liberties over national securities. What do we think when we first look at these? What's the gut check response? I think people will think that the development assistance topic is pretty easy to understand at first. They might not know 100% of what a wealthy country is or what a development assistance means. And I also think that the other topic is very simple and easy to understand at first glance. The only thing is people might need more specific information for what counts as a civil liberty. What about how easy they are to research? Well, the development assistance topic, from my personal experience, is very easy to research. There's also lots of cards that by the time Nationals rolls around will be 1 to 2 years old. There's lots of timeless evidence that will apply even from decades ago or from 10 years ago. there's also lots of evidence that is specific to non-US countries that is very recent, and who knows what the world will look like a year from now. Maybe development assistance, Doge stuff will come up all over again. Whereas the democracies protecting civil liberties versus national security, pretty easy to find relevant cards for it right now. I hope that it's harder to find relevant cards in a year from now, because I hope that we're protecting our civil liberties. I think it's harder to find cards that reflect the exact wording of the topic that are recent, but there will be tons of examples of people arguing, in this instance, the freedom of this matters more than the safety from this. What about cultural relevance? I think that Doge made this topic pretty relevant now, or in the last couple of months, for the development assistance topic, with the way that we cut so many of our foreign aid programs, but I'm not sure how relevant it will be in a year from now. I think that the civil liberties or national security topic is very relevant right now, given things like the No Kings protests, student protests, voting rights being restricted, the Supreme Court case decisions that have come out this week. I'm not sure how relevant it will be a year from now. What about youth appeal? I don't think that development assistance is necessarily super interesting to youth, but it's nationals. You can't qualify to nationals in LD if you aren't interested in debate. But I do think that for the average student in debate, in speech, who is very politically minded, politically active, politically involved, the civil liberties topic might be more interesting to them immediately. Which of these topics is partisan or controversial? I think that the nationalist rhetoric of both the left and the right in the United States can make the development assistance topic more controversial. Generally speaking, the AF is going to be more liberal, the neg is going to be more conservative. Whereas on the civil liberties national security topic, I think that it's pretty controversial because of the Trump administration. There's a big push on the right to value national security over civil liberties of US and non-US citizens, thanks to the Israel-Iran-Palestine conflict. The Supreme Court's also cutting civil liberties left and right. So I think that this one is, again, more liberal on the AF, more conservative on the neg. But also there have been plenty of Democrats that prioritize national security over civil liberties. So also, if you look at domestic terrorism, you could argue that the right is putting civil liberties above national security. So it is controversial, but it's not always controversial the same way. What about educational value? I do think that it's very valuable for students to have to learn a non-US based topic that talks about international relations. And also, they're going to learn about historical injustices committed by the US and other colonial powers against other nations that would obligate us to provide assistance now. But I also think that the civil liberties versus national security topic is very educationally valuable. It will help kids learn their own rights. It will help kids see through propaganda. It will help them be more active members of our democracy. So they're both very valuable in terms of education for different reasons and in different ways. What about the balance of them? The development assistance topic, I think, is pretty balanced. I do think that it might be slightly negatively biased because there's a high burden to prove obligation, but the affirmative is on the more sympathetic, empathetic, like moral sounding side. So I think that it roughly balances out. I do think that the civil liberties topic is at least slightly AF biased now, and if Trump continues to do the same things but more escalatory, it might either change to national security seems more important because we're in the middle of World War III, or it will continue to be the same, we have to take away your rights for national security, even though it's not a national security threat. So I see the civil liberties versus national security topic being more AF or more neg biased over the next year. But there's also a bigger variety of arguments that the AF can make, because there's lots of civil liberties, but there's only like one national security, right? There's multiple national security threats, but national security is like one priority, you could say. So what about how big the topics are? Plenty of ground on both sides of the development assistance topic. The AF can argue from a bunch of different perspectives. So there's lots of arguments, but they all kind of collapse to one of these perspectives. We have past wrongs, so we need to right them now by giving development assistance. We need to promote welfare to be moral. We have an obligation to promote the general welfare, which development assistance does. Or we have an obligation to step in and respond to suffering, which development assistance does. Whereas the negative can argue that we need to put our own citizens first, so there's no obligation, that development assistance is harming more than it helps, so there's no obligation, or that there just is straight up no obligation from one government to citizens of another government, because there's no social contract. There's also other negative perspectives as well. Whereas the civil liberties versus national security topic, I think, is more limited in scope. I think there's a lower variety of arguments. I think that there's a big variety of examples, but in terms of like logical, warranted arguments, I think that it's smaller. I also think democracies, rather than just governments, which is the version of this that was debated in 2017, gives the AF a big advantage because democracies are kind of defined by giving civil liberties. And there's also a ton of civil liberties arguments versus just national security. What about friendliness to traditional debate, lay debate, philosophical debate, which is very important at NSDA nationals? I think that it's pretty friendly on the development assistance topic. You don't need to read a plan. There's lots of philosophical arguments. It's not a very like war or extinction heavy topic. It's not as controversial for the average lay judge or going to have as much bias. You can value governmental legitimacy, you can value morality, or you could value justice if you're reading like our obligations are rooted in fairness. So there's lots of value options. Whereas the democracies ought to prioritize the protection of civil liberties over national security topic, I also think is very traditional and philosophical debate friendly because it's about fundamental principles of this principle versus this principle. There's plenty of philosophical arguments, but you're gonna probably have to talk about big shtick war impacts every round because of the negative side. So maybe that's less trad friendly. You can also value governmental legitimacy, democracy, or morality. So lots of options on this topic. What about progressive debate friendliness? I don't think that the development assistance is the most friendly to progressive debate, but you do get flexibility. You can specify actors under wealthy countries. You can specify recipient countries that we specifically owe development assistance to. The plans that you would read would exemplify what those obligations look like and like prove by example. There's also lots of great like counterplan arguments about what our obligations are instead. Or maybe we are obligated to other countries but not to provide development assistance. And there's good critique arguments on topic for both sides. Whereas the civil liberties national security topic is phrased as a policy topic, but I think that it's actually like less friendly. There's not very many specific plans that you could read that would make sense and still prove the topic, in my opinion. I think counterplans are more difficult because you'd be getting super specific in a way that feels away from the topic. The affirmative has some critique arguments that they could read, but I think it's going to be pretty tough for the neg to win on a critique argument on this topic. Or at least in a pre-planned resolution-based, not opponent rhetoric-based critique. When you look at community bias or reactions, I think that there's some people who are pretty excited to coach a development assistance topic again, myself included, but there's also some people that are mad at how vague it is, and that it wasn't specified, or that it's a policy, but not a policy topic. Whereas on the civil liberties topic, I think that there are some people that are pretty excited to debate a prior nationals topic again, but there are some people who feel the opposite, and there are people who are concerned about being negative, especially in light of recent political happenings in the United States and abroad. So what can you read as arguments on this topic? Well, the affirmative could talk about why we do have an obligation to provide development assistance. You could say that there's an obligation to relieve suffering, that geographic or just where you were born into creating inequality is unjust, so we need to equalize things, that development assistance reduces poverty and boosts the economy, that it addresses historical responsibility for past wrongs, it meets legal obligations as part of the United Nations, that it is in the wealthy country's interest to give development assistance, that it even benefits yourself, that it could solve climate change or promote sustainable development for the environment, that it will strengthen our alliances with the recipient countries, that it prevents humanitarian crises, and that it also prevents conflict or promotes security. The negative could instead say that we do not have an obligation because development assistance slows down growth, it creates dependency, it fuels corruption, that it undermines democracy or governments by the people because the government owes more and has to listen more to what the wealthy country wants than what their own citizens want because the wealthy country is giving them money, that development assistance exacerbates conflict, that it's a tool of imperialism, that it sidesteps your obligation to your own citizens, that it props up authoritarian regimes, that it creates infinite moral responsibility, which is bad, that we're always obligated to help other people, which is impossible, and that there are better alternatives like trade, investment, and things like that. What about the civil liberties versus national security topic? Well, I think the AF has a lot of options. You can talk about how civil liberties should be prioritized or their protection should be prioritized because it prevents government overreach, it upholds democratic principles. When we focus too much on national security, it chills the exercise of civil liberties. That when we prioritize national security, we harm minority groups, that we create terrorism, that when we help civil liberties, we have more faith and trust in government, that they create national security when you have good civil liberties. That it improves our international standing and our international relations when we prioritize civil liberties. It decreases the likelihood of war because when we prioritize national security, we jump the gun, and it encourages democratic participation. A lot of those arguments are pretty similar to each other. I'm sure I'll come up with better ones in the future. This is just what I came up with after a couple hours of research. The negative side, on the other hand, can talk about how we should not prioritize protecting civil liberties over national security because protecting human life is an inherent good. Public safety is the number one duty of government. That a precondition to freedom is being alive or having national security. That civil liberties are not absolute. That we don't need to prioritize civil liberties because we can balance both. And the topic doesn't say when in conflict. Civil liberties can be restored. You can give people back their civil liberties, whereas you can't restore life after it's gone. You deter hostile actors like other terrorist groups or hostile governments who would violate civil liberties if you gave them the chance. National security prevents them from doing that. You can limit foreign influence by prioritizing national security. That national security is good because it promotes economic stability and therefore quality of life, and that national security needs to be prioritized because there's modern threats like artificial intelligence, pandemics and things like that. So what do I think is going to win? Again, difficult to predict a year from now. I'm going to guess that civil liberties versus national security wins, but I think it's dependent again upon what the previous topics are. If nuclear weapons wins and military non-intervention wins, I don't think people are going to vote for a national security topic for the third time in a row, although who knows, maybe they will because they can reuse some cards. But if economic sanctions wins, then I'm not sure development assistance will win because development assistance is kind of like the reverse of a sanction, so the two topics might feel similar. I also think civil liberties versus national securities makes more immediate sense to people. They don't need to do as much immediate research to know about it. It appeases the traditional and progressive parts of the community. People will maybe think of it fondly from the 2017 national tournament and from the 2014 national tournament. But I think development assistance will have its fans from when it was debated previously, including myself. I'm going to narrowly give the odds like 53 to 47 for civil liberties. I think it will be close. What do I hope will win? I'm very biased. I hope that development assistance wins because it was my first ever LD topic and I loved it. I also think that it's bad for us to keep debating the same topics at nationals over and over, like we've debated violent response to political oppression at nationals multiple times. And I think reusing nationals topics is bad because it makes the number of relevant finals rounds to whatever new topics we pick in the future, there's a smaller variety of them, and it encourages less innovation and more copying and just like reusing files. I also think being neg under the current Trump administration is really hard on that topic because he's restricting civil liberties and our national security is like still not all that great. Like we're still at risk even in the middle of saying that we're prioritizing national security. I would give development assistance a 9.5 out of 10. I truly think it will be an amazing topic, but I think that civil liberties and national security would also not be a bad topic, so I'd give that an 8.5 out of 10 as well. We are now at my suggested ballot for this topic. What would I tell you that you should vote for? You do not have to listen to me, but I have researched these topics for hours, each and every one of them, and so this is what I would vote for. My first three topics, I'm very confident in my vote. First topic cycle, I would vote for AI in the criminal justice system is immoral over plea bargaining because of the way the plea bargaining topic is worded. I think it's too neg biased. In November, December 2025, I would vote for rewilding land because I think that especially for non-prog circuits, if you ever get a lay judge, I think degrowth is too tough for the neg. And I think that it's more novice friendly and a lot of novices start on the November, December topic. So I would vote for rewilding. I also think it's more unique and interesting and people will read degrowth whether or not it's a topic because prog debaters have been reading degrowth for years. January, February, I would definitely give it to nuclear weapons is immoral over geoengineering. I don't want two environment topics in a row. Geoengineering is a badly written topic and I think that it needs more time. I think nuclear weapons is immoral is a great different version of a great topic from the past. But once we get to March, April, and nationals, I think that there's either the green set should get picked or the orange set should get picked. If we pick the green set, it's kind of rough because is immoral is going to get used 3 times in the same year, which is kind of repetitive, but at least we won't go from nuclear weapons immoral to don't intervene, which would use very similar arguments. The arguments for nuclear weapons versus economic sanctions are different. And then if we pick economic sanctions, then we could pick democracies ought to prioritize the protection of civil liberties over national security, which is kind of similar to nuclear weapons, but different enough because national security doesn't always imply nukes, and you don't have to get rid of nukes to prioritize civil liberties. So if we pick nuclear weapons as immoral, I think we should pick the green topics. If we pick geoengineering as moral, then I wouldn't be upset if we picked the orange topics, because then we're only going to have one national security topic. The United States military should abide by the principle of non-intervention, and then we can debate the development assistance topic without the development assistance topic being too similar to economic sanctions. I think development assistance and economic sanctions are different enough that they're not too similar, but if I'm going to stick to my guns of let's not debate the same topics over and over again, or at least not right in a row, then I think that it's best to go for nuclear weapons as immoral, then economic sanctions, and then civil liberties over national security. But if nobody listens to me and we pick geoengineering, then we might as well pick non-intervention and development assistance. So what are my final thoughts on these topics? Thanks again for sticking around for this whole video. I know that it's a long one, but I wanted to give the community something to look at throughout the whole year. And hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the arguments I talked about don't get picked. Maybe the topic I think should have been picked gets picked and then it's terrible. Or maybe the topic that I said, I think this one will get picked and I was wrong. What do I like about the topics that the committee came up with and gave to us this year? I'm grateful that it's only 2 options now. It massively decreases the research burden for us coaches before we have to make an informed decision. And it makes, camps' jobs easier. It makes kids' jobs easier. I really like that we're only at 2 options now. I also like that there are a lot of non-policy topics. I think it's great for traditional debaters. I think it's great for lay judge circuits. I also like that there's a lot of new stuff in these topics that we haven't debated before, but the stuff that's repetitive is repetitive of some amazing topics from the past that we haven't debated in many years. I also think that there's lots of topics that would work for both traditional circuits and progressive circuits, whereas the last couple of years, it's been very difficult to debate these policy topics in traditional circuits like Idaho. I also think that there's topics that don't really repeat last year's topic areas. We're not getting the socialism, economic inequality topics that we've had last year twice in a row. I also think that most of the topics are pretty balanced or they're slightly biased, which is good. And I think that a lot of these topics are really relevant to modern times and issues. I know that we're not public forum, but LD I think should be relevant. Kids should be able to see examples of these topics in their real life, and I think they can for a lot of these. What do I not like about these topics? Number one, anytime that the AF has to defend the status quo, that's just gross. Why we decided to write topics that do that, I will not understand. I think there's a lot of repetitive topic areas from cycle to cycle. Why is it possible that we debate 3 military security topics in a row, January, February, March, April, and nationals? I just don't like that. And why is it possible that we debate 2 environment topics in a row and 2 economic relations between a wealthy country and a not wealthy country twice in a row? Why are we doing so much repetition when we didn't get any education topics? We didn't get any social issues topics. We didn't get any parent, family, children topics. We didn't get any internet news, social media topics. I just don't understand why there was so much repetition. I also don't like the fact that we're taking policy issues and then phrasing them as not policy topics. I understand traditional debaters wanting traditional LD topics, but why are we taking stuff that is clearly a policy and then not phrasing it like it's a policy, which makes the research harder to do and the logic of what does it mean to vote AF or vote neg harder? I think if we want value topics in LD, we need ethical dilemma, individual rights, philosophical quandaries topics. And if we want evaluative comparison topics to do that, not policy action topic subjects, but evaluative wordings. I also don't like that there's no explicitly non-US country topics. I really think that it's good when LD debaters have to have an actor, and the actor is explicitly not the United States. We have some topics where there is no US actor, like nationals doesn't only have to be about the US, but that's what most kids are going to talk about. And I think it would be cool if the LD topics had options where kind of like the PF topics are debating about the European Union, right? Or about China, or about Africa as the actor, like the African Union as the actor. We don't have any of that in LD, which I think is sad. There's some topic crossover with PF this year, like the fact that the nuclear sharing topic is an option for PF, and then there's possession of nukes option, like just one example. And last year there was a big issue of PF and LD having similar topics at the same time, so I'm kind of sad that we're doing that again. And then lastly, I think the fact that we're using is immoral in like half the topic options at least is lame. We could be using things like is unjust, is undemocratic, is illegitimate if we want that same evaluative judgment. We don't have to use is immoral over and over again. So what are my requests or my humble recommendations that I would offer to the LD topic wording committee? Because I know that their job is thankless, and I know that it's difficult, and I know that a lot of the times all they get is criticism and nobody says thank you. So I really do mean it when I say thank you for your work. Thank you for putting all of this together. Really, I think this is a good slate of topics, and you're probably going to hear more complaints than happiness, because a lot of the people who wanted the traditional topics aren't the people that are going to make the most noise about it on social media. So what are my 7 humble requests? 1, please continue to have a balance of topics that do not require but don't disavow like progressive styles of debate in addition to traditional. Any topic that can let both styles debate well is great. Please don't make it possible to debate 2 or 3 topics in a row from the same topic area. Don't make it possible for us to get 3 military topics in a row, please. Also, please try to avoid having crossover with public forum topics from this year or the couple previous years, or high school or college policy topics, or even LD topics from the last 4 years. There are so many things that we could debate about. Any crossover we have, there should never be a kid who could debate one topic in their freshman year and then basically debate it again in their senior year. Also, can we avoid writing topics that are forcing people to take really politicized, really partisan views at least 50% of the times? Like, I get that most of the time the AF is liberal, but the neg should have the choice of being like further left or conservative, rather than some of these topics explicitly forcing the debate to be only leftist, only liberal, or only conservative, only liberal, right? Also, please don't write topics where the AF has to defend the status quo, like, or has to say the status quo is good. Like, if it's not a benefits versus harms topic, like where you're kind of defending the status quo, like that makes sense, I guess, but just saying things are fine is not good for the AF. Please also write individual ethics-based resolutions again. We haven't had these in years, but I really think they'd be amazing. For example, a parent's right to know outweighs a child's right to privacy, or the consumption of meat by human beings is unethical. Like, individual action value-based resolutions again would be awesome. And I think trad debaters would be a lot more willing to compromise on policy topics if we got individual ethics resolutions and policy topics in the same season in the same format. Lastly, please use different terms than is immoral. Let's have unjust, undemocratic, illegitimate, things like that. Vary the way that we are wording the topics so that it doesn't feel like kids can just reuse the same framework on every single topic. So that is the end of this video, where we broke down the 10 different 2025-2026 potential Lincoln Douglas debate resolutions. The goal of this video is to help LD competitors and coaches make an informed decision on topic ballots all season long. I hope that lots of you watch this in the summer, and I hope that lots of you are watching this throughout the season. And if I'm right or if I'm wrong, feel free to let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, comment on it, and subscribe. Share it with your friends, share it with your teams. Share it with your coaches. The more discussions I think that we can have about the potential topics, the better. And I hope that there are lots of debate camps watching this too, because I think debate camps also have to make time-pressured decisions that they don't always have the most resources about. But I also hope that we don't just think that because debate camps make certain choices, we have to make the same choices, or that every debate camp has to make the same choice in what they research. So thank you so much for watching, and with that being said, I will see you in my next video, which after I do the same level of research and work on more public forum topics than I even had to do for LD topics, I will see you soon.